had to fly.
On July 2nd, 1937, at 10 a.m., a radio transmission crackled across the Pacific Ocean. "We are on the line 157-337, running online north and south. We are running north and south." It was the last anyone ever heard from Amelia Earhart. She was 39 years old, 22,000 miles into her attempt to fly around the world, and just 7,000 miles from completing the most ambitious flight in aviation history. Then she vanished. For over 80 years, her disappearance has captivated the world. Dozens of expeditions have searched for her. Hundreds of theories have been proposed. Millions of dollars have been spent trying to solve the mystery. But Amelia Earhart remains the most famous missing person in aviation history. This is the story of the woman who refused to accept limitations, who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and who paid the ultimate price for her dreams. What would you risk to prove that the impossible was just another word for unexplored? Amelia Mary Earhart was born on July 24, 1897, in Atchison, Kansas. Her father, Edwin, was a railroad lawyer with a drinking problem. Her mother, Amy, came from a wealthy family, but had married beneath her social station. From the moment she could walk, Amelia was different. While other little girls played with dolls and tea sets, Amelia collected insects, climbed trees, and built roller coasters in her backyard. She kept a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about successful women, doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists. Even as a child, Amelia understood that the world told women what they couldn't do. She was determined to prove the world wrong. When Amelia was 10, she saw her first airplane at the Iowa State Fair. It was 1908, just 5 years after the Wright brothers' first flight. Aviation was still a curiosity, a dangerous hobby for daredevils and dreamers. Amelia was unimpressed. "It was a thing of rusty wire and wood and looked not at all interesting," she later wrote. She had no idea that this uninteresting machine would define her life. Amelia's childhood was marked by instability. Her father's alcoholism destroyed his career and their family's finances. They moved constantly, from Kansas to Iowa to Minnesota to Illinois, always one step ahead of creditors and shame. But instability taught Amelia independence. She learned to adapt, to be self-reliant, to find strength in uncertainty. These would be the qualities that made her a great aviator. In 1916, Amelia graduated from high school and enrolled at Ogontz School, a finishing school for wealthy young women in Pennsylvania. She was supposed to learn how to be a proper lady, how to pour tea, how to make polite conversation, how to attract a suitable husband. Amelia was miserable. In 1917, she visited her sister in Toronto and saw wounded soldiers returning from World War I. She immediately dropped out of school and became a nurse's aide at Spadina Military Hospital. For the first time in her life, Amelia felt useful. She was helping people, making a difference, doing work that mattered. She also spent her free time at a nearby airfield, watching pilots practice. The war was transforming aviation from a curiosity into a necessity. Pilots were becoming heroes. Flying was no longer just about daredevil stunts. It was about pushing the boundaries of human capability. Amelia was fascinated. In 1920, Amelia attended an air show in Long Beach, California. She convinced a pilot to take her up for a ride. The moment the plane left the ground, Amelia's life changed forever. "By the time I had got 200 or 300 feet off the ground," she later wrote, "I knew I had to fly." The next day, she took her first flying lesson with Netta Snook, one of the few female flight instructors in the country. Flying lessons cost $1,000, more than most people made in a year. Amelia worked multiple jobs to pay for them. Truck driver, photographer, stenographer. She was obsessed. Within 6 months, Amelia had bought her own plane. a bright yellow Kinner Airster she nicknamed the Canary. She was one of fewer than a dozen licensed female pilots in the United States. But being a female pilot in 1921 was like being a unicorn. People didn't believe you existed until they saw you with their own eyes. Amelia was determined to prove that women could fly as well as men. In 1922, she set a women's altitude record, flying to 14,000 feet. It was a dangerous flight. Her engine nearly failed, and she barely made it back to the ground alive. But she had proven her point. For the next few years, Amelia struggled to make a living as a pilot. There were no commercial airlines, no flight schools that would hire women, no career path for female aviators. She worked odd jobs and flew whenever she could afford fuel. Then, in 1928, everything changed. Publisher George Putnam was looking for an American woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Charles Lindbergh had made the crossing solo the year before, becoming the most famous man in the world. Putnam wanted to create a female Lindbergh. He chose Amelia not because she was the best pilot, she wasn't, but because she looked like Lindbergh. Tall, blonde, and photogenic, she had the same lean, angular features that had made Lucky Lindy a media sensation. On June 17, 1928, Amelia became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. She was a passenger, not the pilot. She didn't even touch the controls. But the public didn't care. Overnight, Amelia Earhart became the most famous woman in America. The fame was intoxicating and frustrating. Amelia was celebrated everywhere she went, but she knew she hadn't really earned it. She had been a passenger on someone else's flight. "I was just baggage," she said, "like a sack of potatoes." She was determined to prove she deserved the attention. George Putnam became Amelia's manager, promoter, and eventually her husband. He was 20 years older, divorced, and completely devoted to making Amelia famous. He booked her on lecture tours, arranged endorsement deals, and orchestrated publicity stunts. Amelia was conflicted about the commercialization of her flying, but she understood that fame meant opportunity. The more famous she became, the more she could inspire other women to pursue their dreams. She also used her fame to push for women's rights. She joined the National Woman's Party, campaigned for the Equal Rights Amendment, and spoke out against discrimination in all its forms. But Amelia's real goal was to prove herself as a pilot. In 1932, exactly 5 years after Lindbergh's flight, Amelia flew solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She took off from Newfoundland in a red Lockheed Vega and landed 15 hours later in a pasture in Northern Ireland. She had intended to land in Paris, like Lindbergh, but mechanical problems forced her down early. When Irish farmers found her, they asked, "Have you flown far?" "From America," Amelia replied. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, and only the second person ever to do it. President Herbert Hoover awarded her the National Geographic Society's Gold Medal. Congress awarded her the Distinguished Flying Cross. Finally, Amelia had earned her fame. But she wasn't satisfied. She continued to set records. First person to fly solo from Hawaii to California. First person to fly solo from Mexico City to New York. First person to fly solo across the Pacific Ocean. Each flight was more dangerous than the last. Aviation technology was still primitive. Planes crashed regularly. Weather forecasting was unreliable. Navigation was done by dead reckoning and prayer. Amelia's friends and family begged her to stop taking such risks. She was 38 years old, wealthy and famous. She had nothing left to prove. But Amelia had one more dream: to fly around the world at the equator, the longest possible route around the globe. No one had ever attempted such a flight. It would cover 29,000 miles, cross 4 continents, and require dozens of fuel stops in remote locations. The margin for error was essentially zero. Amelia called it her last big flight. She spent 2 years planning the expedition. Her navigator was Fred Noonan, a former Pan American Airways navigator with extensive experience in the Pacific. It was not an ideal partnership, but Noonan was one of the few navigators willing to attempt such a dangerous flight. On June 1, 1937, Amelia and Noonan took off from Miami, Florida. Their route would take them east across South America, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Ocean before returning to the United States. The first legs of the flight went smoothly. They flew from Miami to South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, through the Middle East to India, and across Southeast Asia to New Guinea. By July 1st, they had covered 22,000 miles and had just 7,000 miles left to go. The most dangerous part of the flight lay ahead, a 2,556-mile flight from New Guinea to tiny Howland Island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Howland Island was their refueling stop before the final leg to Hawaii. It was less than 2 miles long and half a mile wide, a speck of land in an ocean that covered 1/3 of the Earth's surface. Finding Howland Island would require perfect navigation and perfect weather. There was no room for error. On July 2, 1937, at 10 a.m. local time, Amelia and Noonan took off from Lae, New Guinea, in their Lockheed Electra. They had enough fuel for 24 hours of flight. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed near Howland Island to provide radio communication and navigation assistance. The plan was for Amelia to contact the Itasca as she approached the island. For the first 16 hours, everything went according to plan. Amelia made regular radio transmissions reporting her position and fuel status. Then the problems began. Amelia couldn't establish clear radio contact with the Itasca. The radio frequencies weren't working properly. The weather was worse than expected. Cloud cover made celestial navigation impossible. At 7:42 a.m., Amelia transmitted, "We are on the line 157337, running on line north and south. We are running north and south." She was telling the Itasca that she was flying along a line of position, but she couldn't see Howland Island. She was lost. At 8:43 a.m., her final transmission, "We are on the line 157337, running on line north and south. We are running north and south." Then silence. The Itasca immediately began searching. They were joined by Navy ships and planes in the largest search and rescue operation in Pacific history. They searched for 16 days, covering 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had vanished without a trace. The disappearance shocked the world. Amelia was not just a pilot. She was a symbol of human possibility, proof that barriers could be broken and dreams could be achieved. Her disappearance seemed to prove the opposite, that some dreams were too dangerous, some barriers too strong, some prices too high to pay. But the mystery also made Amelia immortal. Within months of her disappearance, theories began to emerge. She had crashed into the ocean. She had landed on a remote island. She had been captured by the Japanese. She had faked her own death and was living in secret. Each theory spawned expeditions, investigations, and endless speculation. The search for Amelia Earhart became an obsession that has lasted for over 80 years. In 1939, Amelia was declared legally dead, but the search continued. In the 1960s, researchers began focusing on Gardner Island, now Nikumaroro, an uninhabited atoll 350 miles southeast of Howland Island. They found artifacts that might have belonged to Amelia: pieces of aluminum, a jar of freckle cream, a woman's shoe. But none of the evidence was conclusive. In the 1990s, other researchers proposed that Amelia had been captured by the Japanese and died in their custody. They claimed to have found witnesses who saw her plane crash in the Marshall Islands. Again, the evidence was inconclusive. In 2012, a piece of aluminum was found on Nikumaroro that appeared to match Amelia's plane. But further analysis was inconclusive. The mystery endures because people need it to endure. Amelia Earhart represents something more than just a missing pilot. She represents the eternal human desire to push boundaries, to explore the unknown, to refuse to accept limitations. Her disappearance is tragic, but it's also perfect. She didn't grow old, didn't fade from relevance, didn't become a footnote in aviation history. She became a legend. Amelia once wrote, "I want to do it because I want to do it. Women must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others." She didn't fail. She pushed aviation forward, inspired countless women to pursue careers in science and technology, and proved that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. Her disappearance was not a failure. It was the price of exploration. Every pioneer pays a price. Some pay with their comfort, some with their reputation, some with their lives. Amelia paid with her life, but she gained immortality. Today, there are more female pilots than ever before. Women fly commercial airlines, military jets, and spacecraft. They serve as air traffic controllers, aircraft mechanics, and aerospace engineers. Many of them trace their inspiration back to Amelia Earhart, the woman who proved that the sky was not the limit. It was just the beginning. The search for Amelia continues. New expeditions are launched regularly. New theories are proposed. New evidence is analyzed. But perhaps the real Amelia Earhart was never lost. She lives on in every woman who refuses to accept limitations, who pursues her dreams despite the obstacles, who believes that the impossible is just another word for unexplored. Amelia Earhart disappeared on July 2, 1937, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. But her spirit soars on, inspiring new generations of explorers, dreamers, and pioneers. She wanted to fly around the world. Instead, she flew into legend. The most famous missing person in aviation history was never really missing at all. She was just flying ahead of the rest of us, showing us the way to a world where anything is possible. Her last radio transmission was not a cry for help. It was a promise. We are running north and south. She was still flying, still exploring, still pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And somewhere, in the endless sky she loved so much, Amelia Earhart is flying still.